looking at the figures you've published in the manifesto, when you add up all your tax rises and you add up your spending that you want to do, you still plan in 2026 to borrow an extra 85 billion. I mean, have you learned nothing from the Liz Truss time? I'm delighted to say we're joined by the co-leader of the Green Party, Adrian Ramsey. Welcome to the programme. Now,
good afternoon.
The Greens are an anti-growth or no-growth party. Since we've had almost no growth since the pandemic and none again in April, according to this morning's figures, you must be pretty pleased with this government.
No, not at all. And what we argue is that GDP is a blunt instrument. It simply shows the level of economic activity and not the nature of the society that we have. And this government's been taking us in the wrong direction, both on climate and nature, but also on the level of inequality we have in society, with more children in child poverty, on our NHS being severely overstretched. And so we would like to see a wider range of economic measures that account for the fact that we need to have a fairer society, that people need to have access to public services, and that we need to be using the Earth's natural resources in a way that is sustainable and means we have clean air to breathe and clean water to enjoy.
Okay, you say a wealth tax could raise tens of billions. Now, a number of countries have had wealth taxes over the past 30 years. What have they raised on average?
Well, we're putting forward what the proposed wealth tax that we have would bring in based on.
But you must have studied other countries. So
yes,
what have they raised on average?
There's a wealth tax in places like Spain and Switzerland. That's absolutely true. But what we're proposing is a wealth tax on assets and wealth over 10 million, asking people with over 10 million to pay 1% on assets over that 10 million level, rising to 2% over 1 billion. That would raise 15 billion a year by the end of this next parliament. That's a cautious estimate based on our engagement with academics and experts. And that's one of a number of proposals we have where we're asking those with the broadest shoulders to contribute in a way that we can invest in both defending and restoring our NHS, as well as the transition to...
No, I understand the purpose. It's whether you raise the money or not. In 1990, 12 European countries had wealth taxes. How many have them now?
Well, I quoted you a couple of examples,
so how
Andrew,
many?
Spain and Switzerland. I don't know the exact number, but that's...
The exact number's 3, only Norway, in addition to the 2 you've mentioned. And one of the reasons that they gave up on wealth taxes was that they didn't raise much money. They were expensive to administer, but they didn't raise much money. The average revenue raised by countries that still have wealth taxes is around 0.5% of total tax revenues. That's not 50 billion pounds in Britain's case. It's nothing like 50 billion. It's closer to 5 billion if you're lucky.
And France also got rid of its wealth tax. And one of the reasons it did that was because it was starting it at 1 million euros. We're proposing to start it at 10 million pounds. So much more realistic level to start it at.
But it might mean you'll lose less. If you look at Spain and Switzerland and Norway, their wealth tax clicks in at quite low wealth levels, around £150,000. And even when you do that, you raise hardly any money, just a couple of billion. You're not planning them to click in to over 10 million. You'll raise even less.
Well, we're deliberately not starting it at a low level because we don't want the ordinary householder to be affected by this. So it is very much the very wealthiest, the less than 1% of the population that have over 10 million in wealth and assets.
And it raises peanuts.
There's 15 billion a year is what the wide variety of academics and experts we've engaged with.
No country with a wealth tax has raised anything like 15 billion. Now, you mentioned that France had a wealth tax. It introduced a wealth tax 24 years ago, in fact. Could you tell our listeners what happened next?
Well, I told you that they didn't continue with it. And our proposal is very different to the French one because we are proposing to start it at a much higher level.
But even so, it covered the kind of people that you're talking about. Well, I'll tell you what happened next. 42,000 millionaires left the country. 42,000. They went to Switzerland. They went to Spain. They went to Luxembourg. They went to who knows where, Belgium as well. 42,000 and it undermined the country's tax base. That's what happened. That's what
And
you'd
I think that,
repeat.
and I think that's because they started it at too low a level.
No, it was the
The academic
millionaires that left. It wasn't
it-
the people on 150,000. It was the millionaires that left the country, 42,000
um,
of them.
we have engaged with a wide range of academics and experts in setting up this proposal. And if you look at changes that have happened in the UK in the past, which is more comparable, changes to non-dom status, for example, and things like that, that hasn't resulted in large numbers of people leaving, despite the suggestions that it
Well,
might.
3,500 non-doms left last
People
year.
stay in this
Three
country
and a
for
half
a wide
thousand
range.
non-doms left this country last year.
People stay in this country for a wide range of reasons, Andrew. They love this country like you and I do. They have family commitments here. They have businesses here. It's not as easy as people think to just pack up and go. And we want to, this is also about the type of country that we want to have. The levels of public spending in the health system that we're talking about are about taking the UK to more comparable levels to other European
But
countries.
I'm trying to work out how you pay for that. Now, the top 1% of UK income earners now pay almost 30% of all income tax. These are the people you're targeting with your wealth tax. If they leave, not only do you get no wealth tax, you undermine the income tax base as well. You'll end up with less money than you started out, never mind your 15 billion.
Well, Andrew, I have already given you my reaction and response to why I don't think people will leave as a result of
Why
this.
wouldn't they leave? Some of them are leaving already.
I would also add that we are not proposing any changes to the rates of income tax as part of this. And indeed, we're proposing.
But you're adding 8% to national insurance. That's the same as income tax.
What we want to do is to ensure that people pay the same percentage of their salary on national insurance, regardless of their level of income. So at the moment, middle to higher earners pay a smaller percentage of their salary on national insurance than lower earners do. And so this would only affect people earning over 50,000, and someone earning at 55,000 would pay £5 extra per week as part of this change. And the Institute of Fiscal Studies has been clear that the next government is either going to have to cut public services or increase taxes. And the Green Party is saying that if we make some modest changes to the tax system, then we can put in the investment it's going to need. And we can't expect to have Scandinavian, European levels of public health service based on a US level of tax.
Right, but Scandinavia doesn't have a health tax. Germany doesn't have a wealth tax. Italy doesn't have an overall wealth tax because they know it doesn't raise money. And your figures are fantasy figures. And even when you raise this mythical 50 billion from wealth taxes at some stage, something no country has ever come close to achieving in the world, looking at the figures you've published in the manifesto, when you add up your tax rises and you add up your spending that you want to do, you still plan in 2026 to borrow an extra 85 billion. I mean, have you learned nothing from the Liz Truss time?
Well, there were a range of reasons why the Liz Truss budget was a real problem for our economy. She was giving unfunded tax cuts to the very richest in society. And if the very richest in society gets tax cuts
by borrowing, which is what you're going to do. You're going to borrow 85 billion.
Whereas if we ask the very richest in society to pay more in tax, that can be anti-inflationary. The level of debt to GDP ratio that we're proposing over the course of this parliament would still keep us well below equivalent levels of other European countries and a long way below countries.
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't keep us below Germany. Wouldn't keep us below Sweden.
And
would only keep us a little bit below France.
Also well below where the UK was in the decade after the Second World War.
You tell the bond markets you're going to borrow another 85 billion on top of the existing level of borrowing, and debt is now 100% of GDP. Interest rates will go through the roof, and as happened in the autumn of 2022, you'll crash the economy. It's fantasy economics.
Well, all of the investment proposals that we have got are phased proposals because, of course, most of the changes that we want to bring about, whether that's insulating people's homes, improving public transport, or stepping up the numbers of GPs and dentists, it takes time to deliver that. And we're very clear about the supply side constraints in growing those areas of the economy.
It's how you pay for it, I'm
build
asking.
up that. We would build up. I'm addressing your point about inflation. We would build that up over time, and like any other business or organization, you can you can track the impacts that increasing that economic activity is having, and make sure that it's being done in a way that's good for the economy overall. And actually, if you put the investment in, that can be an anti-inflationary measure.
Aren't you a bit worried that your time is over as Greens? I mean, you look at the thumping the Greens got in the European elections. There's now a continental-wide revolt against a lot of the costs of net zero. People have had enough. Ordinary people are fed up with posh people telling them what to do and how they should live their lifestyles. You've had some good times. It's over. You're in retreat now.
Well, Andrew, I come from a very modest background in Norfolk, so I don't accept the posh label that you're suggesting. And more importantly, if you look at how the Green Party is doing in England and Wales, where I represent, then over the last 5 sets of elections, we've increased our number of elected representatives fivefold in all corners of England and Wales, winning seats from Labour and from the Conservatives in rural areas and urban areas, from younger voters and older voters. Our appeal is growing, is widening. We're better prepared for this election than ever before, with candidates right across the country. We've got more candidates in England and Wales than the Conservatives have, and we've got a bold manifesto for how we will push this new government to take the action that's actually needed, both on the climate and on restoring public services.
You talked about all your candidates. 20 of them seem to have quite serious issues. Some of them were quite serious anti-Semite concerns. Have you rooted them out? I mean, one of your candidates compared Zionism to cancer and claimed the Hamas atrocities on October the 7th were a false flag orchestrated by Israel. There were 20 of them. I think only 4 have been barred so far. Are you still vetting these candidates?
Well, Andrew, clearly those 2 particular quotes you just made are utterly unacceptable, and the Green Party takes any form of racism, including anti-Semitism, very seriously. We have a process for where there's any questions raised around individual candidates to be assessed independently of the leadership. It's good governance for the leadership not to be involved in that directly, as came about very clearly in the EHRC's recommendations on the Labour Party's problems with anti-Semitism. And as you say, there have been a number of investigations taking place, and as a result, there were 4 candidates who had been selected, 4 out of the 574 in the country, that are no longer going to be standing, and where we selected new candidates in their place. And if there's anybody else where there are questions raised, then yes, of course, they will go through that same process.
Adrian Ramsey of the Green Party, thank you for joining us.